Tantor Audio presents Darknesses by L.E. Modesitt, Jr. Narrated by Kyle McCarley. 1. Darkness over the Militia. 1. Tempora Lanacrona. 5 men sat around a circular table. The tabletop was of rose marble, the carved and elaborate pedestal legs of oiled and carved lorcan, so dark that it could have passed for ebony. 3 of the men wore the blue and cream uniforms of the Southern Guard. The 4th wore the silver vestments of the Recorder of Deeds. The last was the Lord Protector, who wore a tunic of violet blue, trimmed in cream, similar in cut and style to those of the officers. The cold silver light of a winter sun flowed through the tall and narrow windows on the south side of the room, windows whose lorcan casements were framed by rose marble columns. Under a white plastered vaulted ceiling, rose damask covered the walls between the pillars framing the windows, but failed to impart warmth to the conference room. "You have all heard and understood what the Recorder of Deeds has said, have you not? You know the limitations of the table?" asked the Lord Protector. "It cannot show what will happen, and it can display only what is happening or what has occurred recently. Is that not so?" Marshal Wierl paused and cleared his throat, then brushed back a short lock of light brown hair. Despite the lines radiating from his eyes, his clean-shaven face conveyed boyish charm. As almost an afterthought, he asked, "How recently?"
2 or 3 days past are most clear,"
replied the older man in the silver vestments.
"Most happenings can be recalled for a week. If an event has great impact on what will be, then it can be discerned for perhaps a month, even a year. But it is impossible to predict what events the table will regard as having great impacts."
The recorder added,
"It will usually not show anyone possessing great talent, and even the results of their actions will show in silver shadows only for a few glasses or a day at most. Of course, by what is not shown, one can at times deduce the use of talent by one's enemies."
The younger blond man, also wearing the uniform and insignia of a marshal in the Southern Guard, asked, frowning slightly, "Why does it not show those with talent?"
"The tables were designed and created at the height of the duarchy by those with talent. I would rather imagine that they did not wish it used against themselves."
A dryness infused the recorder's words. "Do we face anyone with such talent?" Marshal Wierl inquired. The Recorder of Deeds smiled faintly.
"There are always those with talent in Corus, but they are few indeed. The Madrien was the only one that the table could not focus upon directly. Others may arise, but for the moment all those with some vestige of talent who oppose us can be discerned in the table."
"Such as Aelian Edis?"
"The nomad war leader appears clearly in the table,"
the recorder affirmed. The Lord Protector cleared his throat and looked pointedly at Wierl. "Ahem. You were about to report, Marshal?"
"Yes, Lord Protector."
Wierl squared his shoulders.
"The Regent of the Madrien has fortified Demor, as well as the high-road approaches on the south side of the south branch of the River Lud, and placed at least 10 regular horse companies there. There are 5 foot companies, and possibly as many as another 10 auxiliary companies. They retain the terrible crystal spear-thrower."
The Marshal inclined his head toward the younger Marshal.
"Marshal Aliniat can provide more detail on the situation in Zolt and Southgate."
The Lord Protector, the youngest man at the table by at least a decade, nodded.
"Lord Protector," began Aliniat, "in one respect we were most fortunate. Because the Recorder of Deeds discovered the crystal spear-thrower, we could alter our tactics. The siege of the fort at Zolt was effective in forcing the Matrites to retreat, but the Matrites were careful to use the spear-thrower to cover that withdrawal. We now hold Zolt, and it is largely intact, as is the fort there, which we have enlarged and reinforced. However, all those in Zolt have settled in Dimor and put their energies to strengthening it. With those forces and the crystal spear-thrower remaining there, it is most unlikely we will be able to take Dimor in the next several years without an extraordinary commitment of troopers and supplies, and—
Aliniat paused, as if he knew his next words would not be well received.
I would strongly recommend against any such effort.
The Lord Protector laughed. You have delivered Zolt and Southgate when those before you failed. I accept your recommendation. His next words were slow and deliberate. So long as we continue to hold Southgate. A brief smile followed. Now what of the Seltirs there, the ones who remained?
Seltir Benjir vanished in the final attack on Southgate. None have seen him or his sons in the year since. The new advisory council to the Lord Protector remains under the control of Seltir Sinian. They have accepted the rule of Lanacrona and the change in tariffs. As you know, we had to execute several of the Seltirs and some of their families before they grasped the concept that bribing tariff collectors was no longer acceptable. Those who have accepted the rule of law, as opposed to the rule of coin, are prospering, and they will soon control most of the commerce of Southgate. We have been most careful to spare the women, and to insist that they receive the same treatment as women do in Lanacrona.
The blonde Aliniat shrugged.
That also required some executions, but the women are most kind to our troopers and merchants, and, over time, we will have a most loyal province.
My lady, and indeed most of the women in Lanacrona, will find that pleasing, the Lord Protector replied, before turning to the sole sub-marshal, a thin-faced older man with greying hair. What of the shipyards and commerce?
We captured the shipyards without great damage, and to date we have completed 3 deep-ocean trading vessels. 2 were already under construction. The first warship will be ready within the season, and we can build 5 more in the next year, if the coins are available.
How many will be required to take Drama? Asked the Lord Protector.
More than we can build in 10 years,
replied Sub-Marshal Frinkle.
We will also have to develop a school or a system for training officers and crews for sea war.
The Lord Protector frowned. The problem of Drama will not vanish, but we must also consider the growing strength of Aelian Edis. Already we are receiving protests about the tariffs he is levying on trade along the Lost Highway. He is also beginning to take over sections of Ongelia with his new myrmidons.
That will take years,
Frinkle pointed out.
Ongelia stretches over 1,000 vonts from the northwest to its southeast border. His myrmidons can only travel so fast on horseback.
He has conquered all of Iligia in but a handful of years, replied the Lord Protector. He now holds the northern third of Ongelia, and I would not doubt he will hold all of it within a year, if he so desires. There is little of worth in the south, not compared to, say, Defoyar.
Yet we hear of his depredations in the south,
offered Frinkle. He may be spreading such reports to lull us into believing that while he moves elsewhere, suggested Marshal Wyearl. Most likely into Defoyar. Why else would the Landarch have consented to sell his note from the Iron Valley's council to the Lord Protector? The Lord Protector frowned. Ignoring the expression, Wyearl continued. Edis already controls the Lost Highway. If he moves into Defoyar and takes Derica, he will gain control of the Northern Pass High Road and all land trade with Lustria. The Lord Protector nodded. By tariffing both high roads, he can expand his coffers and purchase arms. But who would sell him arms? Certainly not the praetor of Lustria. We would not.
Lord Protector,
interjected the Recorder of Deeds.
Like the Iron Valleys, the Land Arch of Defoyar has iron mines. Unlike the Iron Valleys, the Land Archers have always maintained a foundry and an arms manufactory. Their weapons are excellent.
But the Defoyons do not fight so well as the Iron Valley's militia,
added Marshal Aliniat. What would you four suggest, then? The Lord Protector's voice contained equal measures of amusement and exasperation. Just a message of support to the Land Arch, replied Wierl, one perhaps hinting that the Lord Protector stands by his friends, and that is why you relieved him of a non-producing note with hard golds. But wait for Aelian Edis to act first. All view us with suspicion. If we act or press ourselves upon the Land Arch, he may turn to Edis as the lesser of evils. Also, his forces and the mountains that surround Defoyar may defeat the nomad warrior. If so, then you are free to address whatever enemy is the most pressing. If not, and the Land Arch requires support, send enough forces to be meaningful, but not so many as to look as if you plan to turn them against him.
What of the Iron Valleys?
All the traders of Dekron wish is the freedom to trade and gather golds. All the herders of their north wish is to herd and to be left in peace, said Wierl slowly. Surely there must be a way in which those needs could be met honestly and fairly, since you hold their note for, 6,000 golds plus interest? You might even forgive most of it if they agreed to become a Lanacronan province. You think our Traders' Guild would accept them as equals? One trader is like another. Our lands speak close to the same tongue, and neither their traders nor ours wish higher tariffs to support a war.
Wierl smiled.
You might even suggest that an additional tariff of but 1 part in 20, or 50, is a small price for both sets of traders to pay for avoiding a war, and that you will pledge that the same laws that apply in Tempra and Burlen will apply in Dekron, and, further, that no southern guards will be placed anywhere in the Iron Valleys, save upon the request of the Traders' Council of Dekron.
And what do we gain by such?
More tariffs, Lord Protector, and the ability to move many of the southern guard companies to the eastern borders. You also avoid the cost of a war with the Iron Valleys, and that cost could be most high, as the late Matriel discovered.
And what if they reject such?
Wierl smiled. Then perhaps someone else should attack them, and you will offer condolences. And wait. You might also suggest that few will want to trade with them if they do not honor their debts.
The Lord Protector laughed explosively.
Bring me a plan, Marshal, and we shall see. As you request, Lord Protector.
The faintest trace of a sad smile played around the mouth of the Recorder of Deeds as the Lord Protector stood to end the meeting. 2. 2 men rode on each side of the Nightsheep flock as they guided the animals back to the eastern side of Westridge, toward the stead that lay beyond the western edge of the ridge that was too long and too gentle to be a hill, and too high not to be. The winter sun had already set, and the silver-green sky had rapidly begun to fade into a deep purple-green. To the east, the quartz outcroppings on the edge of the Erlal Plateau, looming over the rolling rises of the stead, shimmered in the last light of the sun. The light snow of 2 days earlier still dusted the red sandy ground and the quarasote bushes that dotted the rises. The lead ram tossed his head, if slightly, and his razor-sharp horns glinted in the fading light, his black wool and face standing out against the snow, where he paused, before continuing to follow the ancient trail across the lower section of Westridge, the flock behind him. The younger man was Alucius.
Riding in the black night silk and leathers of a herder felt strange to him after the years of wearing first a trooper's uniform, then, for the last year, a militia captain's uniform. A gust of wind, acrid and bitter, blew out of the northeast, ruffling the hair that was a dark, dark gray. Not the gray of age, but of a shade that was close to black, but was not. His silver-gray eyes, flecked slightly with green, continued to study the flock and the quaresot bushes, which were all that grew in the red sandy soil of the stead. With the force of experience and habit, Alucius guided his mount, wildebeest, around a dying quaresot bush that had already seeded. He didn't see any seedlings, but those would not appear until spring. In the meantime, Alucius avoided the bush as he would any quaresot, since all had spikes able to rip deep into the flesh of almost any animal, except the nightsheep, who foraged on the newer shoots. The night silk, for all its smoothness, apparent softness, and flexibility, stiffened into a mail-like hardness under pressure, one reason why Alucius wore night silk undergarments, especially when on duty in the Iron Valley's militia. The older man, Alucius's grandsire Royalt, eased his mount around the laggards and toward his grown grandson.
"You've seen most of the stead while you've been on furlough. What do you think?"
It was dry last year. Not so many new shoots, except near the plateau. Was there more rain there, or more snow last winter? Alucius tilted his head, taking in what his talent revealed. He could sense the gray-violet of sand-wolves somewhere to the north, along with the faintest hint of the red-violet of sanders, but the sense of the sanders was so faint that he could not discern where they might be, except that they were not close to the nightsheep.
"More snow, mostly. I've kept them closer to the plateau than I would have liked, but their wool is coming in strong. Despite everything, be a good year."
Alucius glanced toward the lead ram, young for the role, but wise beyond his years. Absently, with his talent sense, he studied the night ram, noting that even the ram's life thread linked him to the land close to the stead, a thread, like all life threads, that, if severed, would result in death.
"He even looks like Lamb,"
offered Royalt. "He does. I miss Lamb, though. I'd hoped to see him once more."
"He was close to 20. Long life for a night ram."
"I had still hoped," Alucius said.
"The young one takes to you like his sire. I can see that."
"I wish I were here rather than at Emol." Alucius remained uncomfortable whenever his grandsire even hinted that Alucius would be the herder before long.
"You have but 10 months before your obligations met."
"We'll see then." Alucius was all too aware of what could happen in 10 months. In less than 3 once, he'd been a scout for the militia, captured by the matrites, collar-slaved, and retrained. In another 2-month period, he'd broken the collar torques of the matrial, formed his own company from escaped captive troopers, traveled 600 vaunts, and returned to service in the militia as a captain, and managed to keep anyone from knowing the extent of his talent. In some ways, he reflected, the last had been the hardest task of all, but the silence about talent was one of the strongest herder traditions, because on it, in a fashion, rested the fate of all herders in the Iron Valleys.
"It's been quiet. Even Custeel says so,"
Royalt offered. "Sometimes that's the time to worry." Alucius laughed ruefully. "Someone once told me that."
"Use my own words against me, would you?"
"Not against you. I just worry." Alucius shifted his weight in the saddle as wildebeest reached the crest of Westridge. The stead buildings lay a good vaunt, 2,000 solid yards, due west, and perhaps 50 yards lower than the ridge crest.
"You worry more now that you're married."
"Wouldn't you?" Alucius quickly added. "Didn't you? You didn't stay in the militia long after you and Grandmam were married. Not from what Mother said."
Royalt chuckled. "Let's just say that being a herder suited me better. especially after the traitors started begrudging every gold spent on the militia.
Like now? Questioned Alucius.
Worse then. Right now they still fret a bit about what happened. Been less than 2 years since the Matrites were in Solend, and they'd still be there if the Lord Protector hadn't wanted Southgate.
That may be, but there's been no real fighting in more than a year, and the Council's cut the militia to 21 companies from close to 30.
Be only 20 weren't for you.
Royalt gestured toward the outbuildings of the stead, now less than half a vaunt ahead of them.
Let's get them in the shed. We can talk more at supper.
Alucius nodded and eased Wildebeest back to the east and south to make sure that the stragglers followed the lead ram into the Nightsheep shed. One of the older ewes lagged, as if she wanted to remain in the open air. Alucius projected a sense of sandwolf, and the ewe closed the gap with the rest of the flock. Once all the Nightsheep were in the shed, Alucius dismounted and tied Wildebeest to one of the posts of the lambing corral. Then he checked the shed a last time. Wendra appeared at the shed door as Alucius slid the last flange bolt into place. She was wearing a herder's jacket that Alucius's mother Lucenda had tailored for her and given to her on her birthday. Both her generous mouth and her golden-flecked green eyes smiled as Alucius turned. She was wearing the green scarf he had brought from Zolt, the only thing of value he had brought back from Madrien. They just looked at each other for a long moment, then embraced. After a time, they separated, but Alucius could sense how their life threads entwined whenever they were close. Why... how... Alucius wasn't quite sure how to phrase the question. He untied Wildebeest. Wendra laughed.
Your mother practically ordered me out of the kitchen when we saw you coming down Westridge.
The laugh died away.
She said you were leaving tomorrow, and she wouldn't allow me to make the mistakes she did.
Alucius nodded soberly. His father had been a militia captain who had ridden out when Alucius was less than 3 and never returned. I still have to take care of Wildebeest.
I'll come with you. Your grandfather's already finished with his mount, while you took care of the flock.
He deserves that. He'll have to go back to doing everything tomorrow.
I know,
Wendra said quietly. The herder, who was also a militia captain, could sense that his wife was upset and trying to hide it. What happened?
It's nothing.
Wendra's breath was a white fog in the winter twilight. Alucius looked hard at Wendra. I don't think so.
It really is. It shouldn't bother me at all. Father sent out a half-barrel of good weak ale. Korkler and Mother brought it. We asked them to stay for supper, but Mother said they had to get back. They'd been delivering barrels to Gortal at the Dustcat Works.
Wendra paused.
Father wishes he didn't have to sell to Gortal, but without his orders...
He couldn't keep the cooperage going. Alucius finished her sentence as he led Wildebeest into the stable, then into the third stall. Wendra nodded, pausing at the end of the stall.
It seems so... unfair. So wrong. Father's a good cooper, and he wasn't lucky enough to have the talent to be a herder. He works hard.
He does. Alucius began to unsaddle Wildebeest, then to groom him. You have to wonder, if there is the one who is, why there is so much evil and unfairness in the world. Thinking of the torques of the Matriel, he added, and so often it seems like the efforts people make to redress one evil just create another.
You're thinking about Madrien, aren't you?
Yes.
You look at things differently now.
Is that bad? Alucius offered a laugh.
No.
Wendra shook her head.
It's still hard to believe that one person controlled the collars of every man in Madrien.
She looked at Alucius.
And you've never said anything much beyond a word or two, except the one time.
There's no reason to say more, is there? You and Grandfather and Mother know, and no one else should. Alucius put down the brush and patted Wildebeest on the shoulder. There, fella. Now for some grain.
But... when the collars failed, why... Why didn't the troopers all revolt?
Some did. Some joined my company. But they were all former captives. Why would the others revolt? I suppose some did, but not that many. Life wasn't that bad there, and everyone had a good place to live. The only really bad thing was that talent officers could kill anyone who wore a collar from a distance, and most of those with collars were men. With that gone, and men having more say in matters, why would people want to leave their homes or destroy things? They might even learn to fight better without the collars.
It bothers you,
Wendraw offered. What does?
You've talked to me about how much better most people lived in Madrien and how shabby Ironstem looks.
Alucius left the stall and closed the half-door behind him. I'd like to think that people would treat others better, but the place where they were treated best used force to require it. It doesn't give me the most hope. He took Wendraw's arm after he closed the stable door, and they left the stable and began to walk back toward the Stead house, arm in arm. Even though it was almost night, the way was bright enough for a man who had the night vision of a herder, so that even full dark, without either moon in the sky, appeared as early twilight might to others.
I don't want you to go back,
she said quietly.
I know you have to, but I worry.
I worry too. Alucius laughed. It's been quiet, except for raiders and bandits.
Grandfather Custiel says that the Rayleys who left the Westerhills are moving back in, and that before long they'll be raiding steads again.
Alucius nodded. Wendraw's grandfather knew a great deal. As one of the closer neighbors, close being over 10 vaunts to the north, Custiel often stopped by to chat with Royalt, and had for years. They might, but there are fewer of them, and they probably won't have to raid for a few years. By then, it might be some other poor captain's problem. He stamped his boots on the porch to remove the thin dusting of snow, then used the boot brush, first on Wendraw's boots, then on his own. Once inside, they cleaned up in the washroom, where the hand pump squeaked with every downstroke, and where the water was cold enough to leave Wendraw's hands bluish. When they entered the kitchen, Royalt was already sitting at one end of the long table. He looked at Lucenda, standing by the heavy iron stove.
Told you they wouldn't be long.
Alucius's mother smiled indulgently before she seated herself at the table and inclined her head to Alucius.
If you would.
Alucius bowed his head. In the name of the one who was, is, and will be, may our food be blessed and our lives as well, and blessed be the lives of both the deserving and the undeserving, that both may strive to do good in the world and beyond. The words of the ancient blessing disturbed him, although he'd come to understand more of their import. Even at his age, he'd seen enough to discover that it was often hard to determine who was deserving and undeserving, simple though it might appear at first glance. The Matriel had brought prosperity and peace to the entire western coast of Corus, after more than 1,000 years of bloodshed and anarchy. But it had taken more than 4 generations of oppression of men, and the use of silver torques that could kill a man at the whim of any woman with talent. Who had deserved what? For how long and why? He still was uncertain. Lucenda stood, as did Wendraw. Wendraw began to hand platters and dishes from the serving table, while Lucenda ladled a sauce that simmered on the stove over a large platter.
Marinated stuffed fowl with the orange sauce and laced potatoes. You're giving Alucius quite a send-off supper,
Royalt said.
He deserves it,
Lucenda said.
Wendraw and I decided he ought to have a meal to remember on that cold ride back to Emal.
Wendraw smiled sweetly at Royalt, though her eyes twinkled, and added,
And you won't enjoy it at all, I imagine.
Alucius almost choked on the mouthful of ale he was swallowing.
Alucius,
Royalt protested.
Once you leave, I'll be at their mercy. I'm but a poor herder.
The other 3 laughed. You've never been at anyone's mercy, Alucius said, adding the cheese-laced potatoes to his platter.
And let's not hear about proper respect, not tonight,
added Lucenda. Royalt offered an exaggerated shrug of helplessness. Alucius took a bite of the fowl, then smiled at Wendraw. It's good. You made it, didn't you? Wendra blushed.
She did. She cooks better than I do,
Lucinda answered for the younger woman.
and she's gotten...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?